Just bear with us, folks, while we sort out a couple of technical issues. In somewhere in southern England, Michael is grappling with his rather dodgy internet. Just bear with us, folks.
It looks like that just worked. So we are now live on YouTube. Hi, we're having a small technical problems, but we will be with you soon. So.
Hi folks, if you're just joining us, looks like we're up to about 90 participants, which is great. I'm just waiting for the tally-ho from Michael. When I get that, we'll kick off. Hello, Nick Smith here, speaking to you from London. Welcome to number 20 in our series of Alpine ClubCasts. Today, we're back in the Himalayas for The Shining Mountain, a Changabang special, with Chris Bonington, John Porter and Andy Cave. I really hope you enjoy it. And how fitting that we should be talking tonight about a mountain which was first climbed by Doug Scott. He died last week. There have been some fantastic tributes appearing since, from Ed Douglas in The Guardian to Stephen Venables on UK climbing. And if members on Zoom you'd like to share any of your memories of Doug, there will be an opportunity to do so later on this evening. Anyone on YouTube or Zoom, feel free to write something in the chat area. So if you're watching live on YouTube or Zoom, please add any questions for tonight's speakers to the chat as we go along, and we'll try to get those answered at the end. And as usual, anyone in Zoom, you'll be unmuted at the end for any applause, and do stick around for a chat and to talk about Doug. Changabang. What a fantastic name for a mountain. It leaps off the page appropriately for one of the most beautiful peaks in the Himalayas. At 6,864 metres, it's in the Garhwal Himalaya in northern India, close to Nanda Devi and the sanctuary, an area which has seen decades of adventure and British expeditions going way back to Longstaff. First tonight, Chris Bonington will talk about the first ascent of Changabang in June 1974. Originally setting out to climb the west face, the team ended up going around the mountain to climb the southeast face and east ridge behind the mountain in this picture taken by Chris. Nigel Buckley interviewed Chris as he was on his way to see Doug for perhaps the last time. Changabang was their first expedition together. You may need to turn up your volumes a wee bit for this video.
Yeah, Changabang is it's one of the most beautiful peaks in the Himalayas. Machu Picchu is another incredibly beautiful peak, but I think Changabang is steeper than Machu Picchu. The actual story of how Changabang took place was that some years before, and I'd been on a small trip, once again, opportunist trip, going off to join an Indian mountaineering kind of trip, and that was a training trip in Kashmir, and so I went on that one, and that was where I got the idea of going for Changabang, and where I started. I made the right connections, and of course Changabang, when it came up in 1974, and I'd seen pictures of Changabang, and it just seemed a fabulous mountain to go for. but it would have been impossible to do it kind of as an external expedition. And so once again, through the Indians, it was a joint expedition with the Indians, and I had Balwant Sandhu as my co-leader, and we couldn't have done it in any other kind of way. And then interestingly, of course, in 1974, it was the first expedition that Doug ever came on with me, and he was already going to come with us to Everest if we actually managed to get permission for Everest in 75. So that's really, so it was a trial run for Doug, and it was interesting. And I think reading some of the tensions we had on the Changabang expedition essentially were going to be replicated to a degree in 75 as well, where Doug, you know, has always organized his own expeditions, and they'd always been on a shoestring. Whereas, of course, suddenly joining a bigger expedition, and the Changabang wasn't, I mean, it was a lovely small expedition, but it still, you know, we had responsibilities to the Indians. And I was used to working with the Indians and, of course, to running expeditions like Annapurna South Face. And I think Doug found my leadership style difficult to handle, because he'd always been in small expeditions where essentially, in actual fact, Doug ran them and got his own way. And so there were some tensions on that, which I thought were interesting. And I think the great thing was we actually realized them through. And I think also it meant that in 75, it made it a lot easier for Doug understanding, you know, the challenges of organizing a big expedition and taking part in it and everything else.
Alan Hankinson in the book sort of makes reference to in big international collaborative expeditions not going so well in the past. So how did you work well as a team, or were we working as two separate teams?
I think the important thing there was, I think if you like, my style of leadership, I believe in that the leader has got to involve his team in the decision-making processes, but at the same time, the leader must, in the final analysis, take the firm decisions himself. In other words, I don't believe in leadership by committee. It works on a small expedition. You know, when a group of your mates go out and do a climb together, it's whoever happens to be the leader of the expedition is usually the person who actually got the thing together and signed all the forms, but you actually are just four mates climbing together, and all those decisions therefore are collaborative as well. But on Changabang, once again, it was a joint expedition, and you had to make the whole thing work. And so it was collaborative, but I found that easy. And I already knew Balwant. We'd actually met on other trips and the similar kinds of trips before. And so that we worked very, very well and easily together. And I think the only tensions really came when I would perhaps, we went off for the summit, and I went with Dougal, because Dougal was a very, very close friend of mine. At that stage, interestingly, Doug had never climbed with Dougal, and yet they ended up by making an incredibly powerful team together. But at that stage, they weren't. And so, in a way, me going off with Dougal to actually establish base camp and go out in front and leave them to actually come in behind. And like I think I even in the book mentioned, you know, I'm aware that I'd caused some problems in that direction, and you know, rightly. But anyway, it's all. But the interesting thing is, I think the whole thing ended up working very well indeed. But that's how the collaborative side of it went, and how, as well, Balwant was a completely different kind of Indian Army officer to the average. I mean, I've done a lot with the Indian Army, and they were almost an Indian officer's mess was rather like a British officer's mess would have been in the 1930s. And I did that, of course, I was an ex-army officer myself anyway. But no, Belmont and I got on very well together.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the other expedition members, how you sort of came up with the team.
Well, the rest of it was kind of almost, they were the people I'd climbed with. Hey, Doug, definitely, because I was planning to take him on the 75 Everest expedition. And though we'd never actually, I mean, I knew Doug, we'd climbed together, he'd organized lectures for me and this, that, and the other, but we'd never been on the same expedition together. And so I think I invited Doug to come along, knowing that I'd also, if we got permission for the 75 trip, I was going to take Doug on that one as well. And then as far as Martin went, I mean, he was once again, you know, a very good old friend with whom I'd done an awful lot of climbing. He'd been with us on South Face of Annapurna. And I think it was why Martin found it, when there were those bits of tension, Martin found it much easier to cope with, simply because, you know, he'd been on the South Face of Annapurna and he was a very close friend. Whereas Doug at that stage, I wouldn't say it was a close friend, you know, we got on together, but it was more on having lectures organized for you and things like that.
It took you 6 days to get to Changabang itself, covering...
And the Ramani, yes, and reading back through that, I'd forgotten it. It was one hell of a struggle. And the whole expedition, I mean, it was hugely challenging. I mean, it was amazing. And of course, the weather consistently, right the way through, was unsettled and bad. And of course, the miracle that the final day when we actually went for it was about the only perfect fine day of the entire expedition. And of course, there were loads of narrow escapes as well. And we were very, very lucky that someone didn't die on it.
So you went up the gorge?
So no, you weren't going up. You go up the gorge, but you don't. The famous gorge that leads into the inner sanctuary. We weren't going on that, and in fact, we hadn't got permission to go there. We hadn't got permission to go anywhere near Nanda Devi. We had got permission to go, so we went up the actual route, the gorge that you approach, if you like, the outer walls of Nanda Devi, is heavy going as well, as we discovered. I mean, it's ferocious. But then we were going up the Ramani kind of side, outside the inner sanctuary. And that's where we had permission for. And originally I thought, well, brilliant, go and do a technical rock climb on Changabang. And then it was obvious once we got there, to all of us, there was absolutely no way we could actually take the Indians onto that. They weren't, I mean, they were totally technically inexperienced. And it had been made very, very clear to me by the Indian authorities that this was a joint expedition and they expected an Indian to be going to the summit of whatever mountain we actually managed to get to the top of. And and that was understood. And of course, Belmont, I mean, he was a good natural climber, even though completely inexperienced in kind of technical climbing.
So you went there with the purpose of doing hard rock climbing?
We went with that purpose, but I think, once again, I mean, I've always been an optimist, and I think the reality came when we got to the foot of Changabang and we looked up at it and saw just how bloody difficult it was, and we also saw, you know, the technical shortcomings of our Indian friends, and I particularly, what was it? Never remember the names. Karan Kumar, and who was rash and enthusiastic, and of course he went rushing off by himself and took that spectacular fall, and it was an absolute miracle. You know, it fell about 1,000 feet.
That's on the col.
Pardon?
That's going up to the col to get round.
Col, and it was well, that was going up to the col. It was going up to the col by which we eventually got round the mountain. And what originally we were planning was to climb that ridge from the col. And then it became absolutely obvious that that with the team we had, it was unrealistic. And therefore we actually then realized that but we could, from the col, we could very easily get down into the upper part of the sanctuary and then get round the back and get onto the col between Kalanka and Changabang. And that was when he had his spectacular fall. But it was also in the various reconnaissances of trying to find a way through it and over it and everything else. And when that really brought out the imbalance, if you like, of the team.
Did you have any say in the selection of the Indian part of the team?
Oh no, none whatsoever. But I knew that Balwant was going to be my co-leader, and I welcomed that. But no, when you're in that kind of level of cooperation, and it was entirely the permission and the support of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation to actually, whether we were going to go there at all. So you had to go along with what they said, and I was happy with that. But having said that, I mean, I'd already met Balwant, and I knew, and I liked him. I knew we could get on well together, and from that point of view, it worked very well. And the two of us, I think, cooperated very effectively.
Go around the other side of the mountain and set up base camp. I think Alan Hankinson at that point has already left, hasn't he?
He had to go back, so he had, and then it became actually a very small, necky little expedition. So we'd done a bit of load carrying, and we'd fixed ropes up to the col. And then from the col, it was a matter of, it was snow down, a snow slope down into the upper part of the sanctuary. And we had this, well, it wasn't even really an advanced base camp, it was just a tent right at the bottom. And then we went actually from there, we went in a single push all the way from there to the summit. And if you remember, we had a camp on the way up. And it was quite hard climbing, getting up there. And then it also, when we were going on that final ridge between Kalanka and Changabang itself, that was no pushover either. And there was a lot of soft snow on incredibly hard ice. And so it was all very, we were pushing our necks out a long, long way.
And so I think it's just Dougal and was it Doug that went for the summit?
No, what happened there, and it isn't in the book, on that final push up, and it ended up, I was at the back. I forget what I was doing, but it wasn't because I couldn't keep up with them. It was just the way the thing sprang out. So I was at the back, and it was by that time, it was Dougal and Doug and Martin were out in the front with a couple of the Indians, and they were all. And when we got there, and and the cloud had just come in, and it was cold and windy, but as I got to this, and as I caught up with them, and they were all in a little huddle, and it was Dougal kind of turned to me and said, "We've decided that this is the summit." And I looked across, and you could see that the other summit was almost certainly a bit higher, and it was about 2 rope lengths away. And I thought, okay, fair enough, but we haven't climbed Changabang, and I'll go with that if you don't want to. But I'm not going to claim a first ascent. And then Dougal said, "Oh, well, I'll go and climb the bloody thing." And I said, "Well, hang on, we've got to go with someone." And at that point, I said, "Well, look, you and Martin toss up to Doug. You and Martin toss up to see who goes with Dougal." And Doug won the toss. So it was, and Martin, took that. That was fair enough as well. So then we started down. The two of them went for it. we were going slowly down, and it was awkward going. And then Balwant there was pissed off because, in fact, I hadn't consulted him at all. He obviously thought he should have been the person who went for the summit with Dougal. And I wasn't going to have that, simply because he probably wouldn't have gone as fast. So he was sulking. And so going down was awkward. And dear Balwant went facing outwards, striding down, show these buggers they can do it. And then he slipped and fell. And it was pure chance and a bit of luck that I forget how he stopped himself, but he was able to stop himself. Otherwise, he'd have gone all the way down and been killed. So it was, but then we all got back down. And but that was one of the bits of the story that didn't come out in the book.
If you could go back, Chris, would you change your mind and maybe send Balwant with Dougal?
No, simply because it would have actually put him and Dougal at risk. So that no, I took the right decision there without a shadow of doubt. But it's a matter there. You were juggling, if you like, the politics of the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, and also the internal politics of your expedition, and once again, the fact I think from Doug's point of view, it was so very, very different from all the trips he'd done, which were, of course, were basically, they were a little group of Nottingham lads going out together, and they did some fantastic stuff together, but it was, very small scale, on a minimum amount of money, and in a way, Doug was the driving force in the Nottingham Climbing Club, just through his sheer force of personality and his sheer ability.
Yeah. We're reflecting on the summit day. You say yesterday was one of the longest, hardest, and most satisfying days I've ever had in the mountains. I thought that was interesting because last time I spoke to you about Changabang, you said it was easy.
Yeah, well, I had the thing about Changabang, I think, because it was just before Everest, and because it was, and it's always, I mean, in reflection of it, I've never, I mean, if I do a Life and Times lecture, Changabang is a couple of slides.
Yeah.
And, it was a tiny kind of segment. And so even, when we last talked together, and that time, because I hadn't had time to look at the book, and my memory of it was absolute. There was one or two things I did remember. Ironically, the thing I vividly remembered was that time when we got to the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten everything else. And it's only when reading the book that I actually saw the whole thing. And I think and to me as well, right at the end, I don't think I'd ever read the girls, or I might have read, but I'm not sure I ever did. I read the girls' kind of impression of it. And that was very, very kind of revealing in every way. And of course, and I knew them all, knew them well.
Yeah. You had some big personalities there, some strong climbers. Did you regret, or were they disappointed that they didn't climb the original goal? Was it the West Ridge?
No, the West Ridge. No, it was so absolutely obvious that, I mean, if there'd been just the four of us, we'd have definitely have gone for the West Ridge. And I think, I mean, yeah, with our joint abilities, I think we could well have climbed it. But with the joint expedition, and the others saw that very clearly as well. And so the others, I think, were understanding of that. And I think the only time when they were pissed off was when I actually kind of said, well, Dougal and I are going to go out in front and find the route. And I think that was, I think I said it in the book as well. I realised that was not a good idea.
Martin Boyson describes the 21st of May when he sees the route as not a happy occasion, but says that you were still optimistic about it. And obviously, and Doug as well was big wall climbing and experience. Yeah, you probably could have done it, didn't you?
Well, I think when we saw the mountain, it was obviously a very, very serious climb. But I think probably if there'd been just the four of us, well, maybe even if with just the four of us, we might have decided that, okay, this is a first ascent. Let's try to find, and usually it pays when you go to climb a mountain that's never been climbed. You usually try to find the easiest way up it.
Yeah.
So it might well have been that even then we'd have actually decided we'd go around. But I mean, I think there was no disagreement amongst any of us about, turning away from the ridge and going down and getting into the top of the sanctuary. And even that was, I mean, it was a brilliant expedition when you think of it. The more reading the book or glancing through the book, it's made me realize just how good it was.
So thank you, Chris, and of course Nigel Buckley there was asking the questions. Okay, folks, we're going to leap forward 4 years now, during which time Changabang was climbed via several other new routes by a Japanese team, a strong Cumbrian team, and of course by Joe Tasker and Peter Boardman, resulting in that wonderful Boardman book, The Shining Mountain. 1978 is the year. John Porter is joining us from his home in Cumbria to talk about his brilliant expedition then, with Wojciech Kurtyka, Christoph Jurek and Alex McIntyre, aiming for a direct route up the south face. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Nick. Welcome, everybody. Changabang was almost a second thought for us because we climbed together, Alex, Wojciech and I, the year before in Afghanistan, and Wojciech had then put an application in for Gasheron 4, West Face. But halfway through the year, we didn't get permission for that. And fortunately, I'd put in an application for south face of Changabang with the IMF. But when I rolled up at the MEF screening committee, I'd never even seen a photograph of the damn thing because it was only about a week before that we realized we had to change our objectives. So I was sat there amongst all the grandees of the MEF, trying to convince them that we deserved a big grant to go and climb the south part of Changabang. And Doug was there, and he flipped this photograph across the table at me, kind of like a penny soccer. It came in front of me. And I picked this thing up and I said, bloody hell, that looks steep. And so he said, well, where does your route go, youth? So he gave me a pencil and I scribbled something up it and then I flipped it back at him. And sort of stumbled on with the rest of the story until they said, all right, Mr. Porter, thanks very much. We'll tell you, we'll consider your request later. And that happened to be a break in the proceedings. And on the way out, Doug came up to me and said, well done, youth. You chose the only chop route on the entire south face, but I'll support it anyway. So here's the story of that climb. I'm going to share screens with you now. Just so we get orientated here, this is that West Ridge Chris has just said they didn't climb. They dropped over from this point down. I'm just going to, oops, sorry. Get my laser out. There we go. So they dropped down the other side here and climbed up to the col between Kalanka and Changabang. Andy's going to take you around this side of the mountain after me to the north side. What really inspired us, and as Doug always said, climbing isn't competitive, it's just building on the shoulders of others. And Pete and Joe had climbed this amazing face you can see here 2 years before us, and that was really inspirational. And we thought, why not try an alpine, complete alpine style in one push of the South Buttress? The route's just around the corner, actually. So that's the Pete and Joe route. You can begin to see the steepness of our South Buttress route there. Well, there's the team post as opposed to prior. Alex McIntyre starting left to right, Wojtek next to Christoph Zirk here, amazing Elo, Katie Gadria, and of course myself and Christoph Zirk. This is what we looked like at the end of the trip. Climbing of the poles was interesting in those days because, of course, it was behind the Iron Curtain. And we'd had this little program of bringing dollars and pounds out, which we then change on the black market at about 10 to 20 times the official bank rate. And in this case, that managed to buy us tickets to fly out to Mumbai, which is the only place that Lot flew to. And Wojtek and I went out about 2 weeks early, and then took a train up to Delhi and went to the IMF in the Congress buildings to be told on the very first day, well, you can't go to Changabang. And we said, why is that? He said, because the whole thing is closed. And what had happened was it had just hit the news of the American placement of a nuclear device to monitor Chinese nuclear explosions over in Xinjiang. That had happened in 1965. And it only hit the news 13 years later. And I happened to be in the office the next day with Terry King. He was going into Nanda Devi. And he got totally frustrated. He picked up Mr. Ram, who was the secretary at the time, and said, we've come here in good faith, and you must give us permission to go. And he dropped him back like a lump of coal. And I apologized. I said, Mr. Ram, I'm so sorry, but you must understand that Terry King is a famous English actor. And he said, oh, an actor. Well, in that case, perhaps tomorrow you should go and see Mr. Singh. I will give you his address. And for the following few days, Terry and I put on this little act of good guy, bad guy, with Terry at the end of each meeting when we were told, no, we couldn't go, dropping somebody back on the chair and them saying, well, perhaps you should go and see Mr. Ram. And this happened until we finally got to Mr. Desai's private secretary. And we were sat there, by this time quivering in our boots, thinking we might even be arrested, when the personal secretary came out of his office and said, right, you're Mr. Porter and you're Mr. King. No more amateur dramatics, Mr. King. We decided it's best just to give you permission to go into the bloody Nanda Devi sanctuary to get you out of our hair. So that's what we did. We traveled in post-monsoon up the amazing roads from Delhi to Lata. The usual post-monsoon avalanches had taken out quite a bit of the road, so we had to carry around these avalanches and hire a bus on the other side. Here's Christoph, amazing scene looking back down the Ganga until we arrived at the village of Lata. This is post-monsoon conditions, September. And it was here that we hired a fantastic group of lads to start the journey into the Nanda Devi Sanctuary. And unlike Chris, we had permission to actually go up the main gorge, which had originally been explored by Longstaff, and then of course Shipton and Tillman eventually found the way in. And that was the way the successful Nanda Devi expedition went in. And for these lads here on the left, they were our porters. They were a great bunch of lads. But that was their expedition. I mean, they are the team members as much as us. We were just the climbing team. These are the guys that had to do the hard work, carrying 30 or 40 kilos up and down these incredibly steep and difficult sections of the gorge, until finally you reach the rim at the end of the gorge and you're looking into the inner sanctuary. Our base camp was right about there. And that was our base camp with everything drying out. We were very lucky that two of the lads had found one of the barrels that had been left behind that had all of our hammocks and ropes in it, and they came back in with that, and that saved the day. Well, that's the upper 2/3 of the South Buttress. The route basically follows a TD type alpine style route somewhere between the Fendo Spur and the Walker Spur. And then we had another 5 days getting to the summit. That's the Cyclops Eye, which you'll see. Now, we knew that this section here was probably going to require hammocks because it's very steep. Alex had the hammocks here on the right made by Troll and his design. And judging from this picture at base camp, you might have questioned whether or not we were going to get up the bloody mountain or not. But it was all right. It was all right on the day. Well, this is classic lightweight alpine style climbing. It's myself, Christoph, Wojtek, and Alex, and also showing off a bit of alpine style with our fancy new equipment. We spent 2 days getting up to the base of the mountain. We did go up and make a drop, and that's known to Debbie behind. There's many reasons people go climbing, but for me, one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen at about 16,000 feet was a single flower poking its way through the snow on the Changabang Glacier. Life finds a way. And then we started up the face, 8 days on the face itself. This is the very first pitch. I think it was the only pitch we dared haul on, or we didn't carry our sacks up this because we didn't have haul bags. We tended to carry them. And that's the final 5 days of the face looming up there in the background. For the first 3 days, as I say, up some lovely Chamonix-like granite. This is Wojtek in the lead. We worked in teams of 2, myself climbing with Alex. We had hauling days, and then we'd get a lead day, which of course was a heck of a lot more enjoyable than carrying 30 kilos on your back twice up Jumars. Don't be fooled by the good weather, although we were on the sunny side of the mountain, and you'll see when we get to Andy's shots how damn cold the north face looks. But every day we had an afternoon storm, and we just had to contend with that. So this is a morning and afternoon shot. And at the end of the 3rd day, coming up to the top of the Fendo Spur, where the next morning we were greeted with the early morning light on the final head wall, and sort of 5 days working our way up this. We bivouacked sort of there. That's the Cyclops Eye, and then finally onto the top. The magic of the mountains, without this single crack that appeared as we entered the head wall, we simply wouldn't have climbed it. We didn't have bolts, but the single access crack allowed us to enter that upper face. A day later, we thought originally our line was going to take us up this line of here, but it turned out to be rotten and rather overhanging in places. And I'd spotted something that looked feasible out to the right from halfway up the glacier. And that's where we went. We turned right, and for the next 4 days, we worked our way out across the face. Here you can see the hammocks looking somewhat more functional than they did draped in that boulder at base camp. But it was all very precarious. You couldn't afford to drop anything. Obviously, we were climbing 12, 14 hours a day. I don't think I ever on a whole day arrived with the whole sacks at the camps before midnight. And then you had to set up your hammock and cook up. And then fortunately, it was always sunny in the morning. So you had a nice bright time to get going in the morning. This is probably technically the hardest pitch. That's my high point up there. There is a rope that Wojtek is clipped into leading to it. I'd taken 3 quite serious falls getting up to that point. It was 5'10" climbing in big boots and A3 plus. I think my longest fall was pulling off 2 sky hooks and 4 ropes and a knife blade before a peg finally held me. And then at this point, a bit higher on the wall, these are the haul sacks. Of course, they are Haston sacks. And in the afternoon storm, Alex had clipped into the wrong end of the rope, and he'd actually fallen the full into the rope. And when I got down to him, he was draped over the Haston sacks, the 2 that were left. And I said, "Alex, are you okay, mate?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't want to play this game just to have a rucksack named after me." And of course, unfortunately, that is what happened a number of years later. Day 7, entry to the Cyclops Eye. Alex in action, very good mixed climber. climbing the backside of the Cyclops side, up the other side, where we put a couple of fixed ropes up, and then came back to Wojtek, who said, we have a problem with Christoph. He thinks he's in Poland. Unknown to us, Christoph had developed a kidney complaint, and he hadn't eaten for a couple of days, and he was beginning to hallucinate. So we had a horrible bivouac, all of us wondering if we were going to be faced with the awful possibility of having a friend and a teammate unable to move the next morning. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. The poles are tough. I stayed close by Christoph as Wojtek led us out on the final day, making sure he had his Jumars on correctly. And finally, we broke out onto the summit ridge, Kamet, and there in the background. This is Alex coming up to the summit. And Alex, my dear friend, on the top of Changabang, the real summit, because we came from the other side. And then that wonderful descent shot. This is the false summit you're looking at here. We bivouacked just about where Wojtek has stood on that little col, and we were treated by this amazing sunset on Nanda Devi that night. And sure enough, next morning a storm blew in, and we had a pretty gnarly descent back down the original route, and then walked out to a now harvest season latter, after that amazing time in the world of blue and gray and white. Your senses are just completely overwhelmed by harvest time. And here's Wojtek, the mighty Wojtek, cleaning up his hands after the climb, saying, well, what next, chaps? So that's the story of the South Buttress. I'm going to pass you back to Nick and see you a bit later. Cheers, Nick.
Thanks, John. Really enjoyed that, thank you. So to complete the trio, it's on to the late 90s now and around to the North Face. Andy Cave is going to talk about that, along with what the French have been getting up to since. Over to you, Andy.
Hey, thanks. Welcome, everybody. Fantastic to hear Chris and then John talk about their experiences on Changabang. Really inspiring. I guess it's been a stage, really, where different teams have gone there over the years, the Lake District climbers, and then myself with our team in the 90s, and then the French just a couple of years ago. And I've got some great video clips that the French team have kindly let us look at. Just thinking about Doug as well a little bit. I never climbed with Doug Scott, but I got to know him, shared a few beers over the years, and some good anecdotes. When Chris talked about him, Doug having his own mind. I remember coming back from Pakistan and being on the same flight as Doug, and we stopped to refuel in Dubai, and they said that no one must leave the plane. It's just refueling. And I could hear Doug chatting up their hostess, explaining that this was the cheapest duty-free in the world, and he should be allowed to get off the plane. And eventually they caved in, and he was the only person that actually got off the plane and came back with bags and bags of booze. And I must say, I was pretty impressed with his skills in that department. But okay, I'm gonna share the screen. I think I've done something really silly. I'm just going to unshare my screen. Sorry about this. And I'm going to just go to the start. So I'm going to start really in 1996. Which is when the British interest in the North Face of Changabang started. And that was really down to Roger Payne and Julianne climbers' contacts in India. So let me try again. Sorry, after all that. Great stuff. So yeah, the north face of Changabang in 1996, Roger Payne and Julianne Clymer managed to get permission to try this incredible face on Changabang, approaching from India still. Very sensitive because of politics and it being located within the inner line. Andy Perkins and Brendan Murphy were the other members on that team, and they had quite good weather, quite good conditions, and they were stopped really by halfway up the face. Andy Perkins was seriously ill with a gastro problem, and so they descended, but most of the team, except Andy, were very keen to go back the following year, and Brendan actually sent me a letter from India inviting me to go back in 1997. I never actually received that letter. It got lost in the post, but we chatted about the mountain and the route in the Bricklayers Arms just up from the Alpine Club in London. And yeah, I was pretty motivated by it. I mean, it just ticked all the boxes for me in terms of technical, hard climbing with somebody I'd climbed with before. We tried the South Ridge of Gasherbrum 4 together. And on this trip, also, Mick Fowler and Steve Sustad were going to make up the other climbers. So Roger, Julie, myself and Brendan, and Mick and Steve. And of course, Steve is in the red jacket here, was somebody who had, as a very young alpinist, had climbed with Doug Scott on Shivling. So he was pretty experienced, and Mick and Steve had climbed together before. So we've got Roger on the left, sadly no longer with us, was killed guiding in an accident on Mont Blanc. Myself, Steve, Julianne, Mick, and our sort of Indian base camp team. And down on the right there, Brendan Murphy, Irishman, academic, who, yeah, was a scientist in Cambridge. And here he is in Delhi trying out, I think, some sort of new teeth or something, just a little bit of fun. So the Indians really helped us. I think Mendit Singh is on this call. So hi there, Mendit, really helpful in terms of helping us with bureaucracy and planning and travel and all the porters. It's actually a really quick approach to get to the North Face. It's not like going in the Rishi Ganga down to the left of the picture. We basically, from the roadhead in 2 days, got to base camp, which is a little bit fast, you know, and almost the height of Mont Blanc, and we're all kind of headaches and such like. And then we went up to check out the face over a number of days and to acclimatise. And our plan was to climb the North Face, and then we thought we would leave caches of food so that if we reversed the Bonington Scott route, the first ascent, we would have food supplies there. And that was our plan. We never actually left food supplies because there was quite a lot of deep snow and cold temperatures. So we're climbing pre-monsoon, but it still felt very, very wintry when we were there. Hard ice and a lot of powdery snow at the bottom. Spring hadn't quite arrived. Just walking into base camp with our porters. And this is a really interesting shot. So we've basically walked in from the sort of center left up that valley. Base camp is at the junction there, the right angle corner, and then that's the glacier leading up to beneath the North Face. And here's our first proper look of the mountain. The line that the team had tried in 1996, and actually the line that 2 years ago that the French team started up and then transferred over onto the route we eventually did. That first part of the route wasn't in condition when we were there. It was almost, I don't know, too dry. It basically didn't exist. And so we had to look for alternatives. And myself and Brendan, Mick and Steve spied one line, and Roger and Julie were keen actually to try a slightly different line to the left. And one thing was that we didn't really know if the top part in the sort of granite shield was possible. We couldn't see a line that linked. But the only way we would find out was to go and try it. And that's so Changabang and Kalanka there in the photo. Climbing was pretty difficult and difficult to protect. This is Brendan leading, and on day 2, I think, and so we're basically climbing like we would in the Alps, just 2 half ropes, food for about 8 days, and a small tent that we're hoping to put up on little ledges here and there. The problem we had was that most days we had really bad afternoon storms that basically meant that we never really got a full climbing day. So by the time we got ready and dried out from the storm the day before, so a little bit of a late start, and then by 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we had to really find somewhere to stop. So it was very, very slow going. And yeah, this is day 4 where we were moving up, and just an hour or so after this photograph was taken, maybe 2 hours, there was a really big storm that we were caught in. Just very localized electrical storm. It's really frightening. I talk about it a lot in my book, but I was a little bit traumatized by that storm, and I was unsure about carrying on. So we decided to have a rest day, and Brendan would go out and check out the line from there, me in support, just a recce really. And then after a day of being settled, I decided that, okay, yeah, let's carry on. We were quite concerned because we've only got 8 days worth of food, and it's day 5, and we're nowhere near the summit ridge yet. But it's a beautiful mountain, and when you look at that shot, you can see the kind of architecture that you're climbing in, almost sort of, El Capitan granite with ice smears down it. Really remarkable. And for people that are climbers that are used to technical climbing in Scotland and sort of Chamonix, this was just perfect for us, really. It's everything we dreamed of. And we climbed, I think, pretty much with our rucksacks on, and very little aid climbing. This shot, there's a bit of a story behind this shot, why Brendan hasn't got a rucksack on. On the evening where we had the storm and survived that, he was climbing up towards me, and he climbed a slightly different line seconding and fell and took a huge swing, was pretty lucky. Climbed up to the tent, and we spent the night out in the tent, and then the next morning he's having to go back out to take the ice screw out that I'd put in to sort of protect him the night before. So that's why that shot there. This is moving up the head wall, starting to get into some of the, probably like the crux section really. Again, free climbing, just putting wires for protection and trying to enjoy the movement really. Couldn't always get the tent up. This is me. I know it looks like I've just been on a stag do for 3 or 4 days, but it is actually day 8 of Changabang, and we have no food left now. But we joined with Mick and Steve actually on the ice field just below, and they told us they'd got extra mashed potato powder and that we could have some of that when we next met up. I mean, we're climbing in Alpine style, but having multiple teams on the mountain is not ideal, and I think Mick certainly and Steve didn't enjoy it, and we actually dislodged a stone just before we took this bivouac, which actually fell down the face and went through the tent that Mick and Steve were in. So they were shouting up a lot of abuse. At the same time, Roger and Julie were off to the left on a separate line, and the incessant spindrift actually defeated them, and they decided to actually abseil off and go back to base camp. So here we are. This is the sort of big feature that leads up to then a sort of a sort of granite slab above this, covered in powder, that leads up to the summit ridge. And we did actually use a little bit of aid on that little tower at the end of the groove just to get around that. But it, yeah. So when we got to the ridge, it was my birthday, and or the day after we got to the ridge, and it would have been nice to go to the summit that day, but the weather was absolutely awful, so we just sat in the tent and just waited for the weather to clear. Very, very hungry, and not actually knowing if Mick and Steve were actually going to make it up the face with this fabled mashed potato powder. And so now we're on the route, the same ridge that Doug and Chris and the Indians had done, and that great shot of John's who's coming down there. Quite tricky ground, as Chris said. And of course, there was the Indian on the first ascent who fell down the face here, the Indian climber. And what happened to us is that we went up to the summit, to the true summit, which is the first summit, and then you have to descend into a col, which I guess is where Dougal and Doug had gone. And it's definitely a little bit more effort and technical when you're tired, but we wanted to get to the main summit. On our way down, the clouds were rolling in and out, and we thought we saw Mick and Steve, and then they seemed to vanish. And what actually happened is that Steve's crampons had balled up underneath him, and he took a big fall and pulled Mick with him, and they went a long way and were lucky to survive. And Steve had really hurt his ribs. It turns out that Steve, who's a pretty tough guy, had actually fractured numerous ribs, so that when we got down there, we helped them climb back out, and we continued to the col between Changabang and Kalanka and spent the night there. So you can see that's a good shot. And above Mick in the yellow jacket, you can see that ridge now going up to the summit. The north face is off to the right, and we're here in our little tents. And big decision time whether to upsail back down the north face. With hindsight, that could well have been the best course of action. We hadn't done much of that in terms of using a Bolokov threads. That was quite a new thing. And there was just something about the security, or what we thought was a secure way, going back down the Bonington and Scott first ascent route. In actual fact, with hindsight, yeah, whether that was a difficult route, not because it's steep, but because it's the angle that actually collects snow and so is more avalanche prone. Not the slopes that we were climbing on particularly, but the slopes up above us on Kalanka, and in the thick mist we were unable to see those. So it was quite a difficult descent. We actually got caught in a small avalanche. We got to this cliff, thought about bivouacking, decided to continue, just navigating really from images that we'd seen. And basically this afternoon, Brendan was killed in an avalanche while we were sort of moving an abseil from one place to another to go over some very difficult, very steep ice cliffs. I think when it happened, I mean, I talk a lot more about it in the book, but I didn't think that Brendan had been killed. I didn't realize how big the ice cliffs were below us, and also how much volume of snow there was in the avalanche. So you can see here, Steve is also suffering. So suddenly we're in a situation which had never happened to me. I've been, to that point, very lucky, never lost anyone on an expedition in the mountains. So it was obviously incredibly distressing. I'd also developed frostbite myself in my thumb, and Steve Sustad with his broken ribs. So it suddenly became, to be honest, an epic battle for survival. And we still had two 6,000 meter passes, almost mountains, to climb over, reversing what Chris and Doug had done to get back out of here to survive, having by this stage not eaten for quite a long time. Steve, who's a very tough guy, in the distance just below, was actually keen just to sort of be left there in the tent. But of course we would have none of that, and we all had to stick together to get out of there. So a fantastic climb, but marred by, the loss of a dear friend, really. So yeah, triumph and tragedy. Obviously I wrote the book, and I took some time out of climbing, but this sort of climbing for a couple of years, although I'm a mountain guide, so I had to go back to the mountains to earn a living in a way that kind of helped me get back on the horse. And then a couple of years later, I returned to the Himalayas with Mick. I think in terms of history on the face, I'm not 100% sure. I know there was a Russian-American trip that did a route to the right of our route on the north face. I think they used bolts and maybe sort of semi-big wall style. There were also some Mexicans that went subsequently, and I think they vanished on the mountain. And then 2 years ago, a very strong team of French climbers based in Chamonix from the GHM group went, and I'm going to show you a couple of video clips that Seb Watu, who's on the call, took. It's very impressive, and then I'll hand back over to Nick. So basically you've got Seb Wati, Seb Rattel and Leo Willem, the three climbers. They climbed, I think, part of the climb just as a practice at the bottom, and came back down to acclimatise, and then did the whole route, starting up the 96 route and switching to the 97 route, but got to the summit ridge and the first summit in 3 days, and then repelled the route. So no mean feat, really, really impressive. The guys made a film, Changabang and the Mirrors of Repetition. It's a brilliant film with incredible footage showing the technical difficulties of Changabang. So I believe that's on YouTube, so you can check that out. So I'm going to show you two clips of the French climbers. The video will stutter and it will look slow. So I was joking that these are really fast French climbers, but because the video quality is not very good, it will make them look like British climbers. So sorry about that, Seb. Let's see if we can make it work. So this is just a little clip from the lower face.
C'est une belle longueur.
Longueur majeure, hein.
Ouais.
Il n'en faut pas moins quand même.
Il y a juste le minimum syndical. Il n'y aurait même pas de fissure pour passer.
Non, trop bien.
Great stuff. And then the next clip is the team coming up to the north summit of Changabang. Again, slower than it really would, but you get a great view looking down the ridge and also across to Nandi Devi.
Allez Léo. T'es content aussi quand même?
Great stuff, everyone. Well, thanks for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand over to Nick. And, if you've got any questions, we're going to stick around. And thanks again to Seb and the team for letting us use those video clips. Do go and see the full film if you get the chance. I think thank you. Yeah, good.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Andy. And that footage, as you say, incredible at the end. I'm just going to tell you a wee bit about the books that we've heard about tonight. Andy's book, Learning to Breathe, if you want to read more about that, is an incredible read. John Porter's book, One Day as a Tiger, another fantastic read, and that deals with the Changabang. And then Chris's book, which I don't have to hand, is amazingly, it's called Changabang, and it's by members of the expedition, and himself included, and is edited by Alan Hankinson. Another book which I can't not mention is this one, The Shining Mountain by Peter Boardman. And that's the book that, you know, I first heard about Changabang when I read that book. And it's another fantastic read. So I do recommend you read those, you have a look. So folks, so thanks very much to all the speakers. Now's the moment for questions. So if you've got a question and or you'd like to say a word about Doug Scott, do switch on your video, go with your mouse to the bottom of your screen, click on participants. At the bottom of that screen, you'll see the option to raise a hand. And if you're on YouTube or Zoom, you can just type your question into the chat, and I'm hoping that Nigel and Mike perhaps will keep an eye on those. I'm going to kick off first by sharing a video that Reinhold Messner has made for Doug.
The last stairways to heaven. Congratulations, Doug, what you did for the Nepali, for the mountain people generally. Your charity work is as great than your Everest and your descent on Ogre Peak. I hope to see you soon.
Isn't that wonderful? So I'm just going to look down the list to see. So I think, first of all, tonight we'll start, if we can try to unmute Lindsay Griffin, Michael. Lindsay sent me 10 or 11 photos of Doug. So what I'm going to do is share those next. And with any luck, we can get Lindsay on the line. Are you there, Lindsay?
Am I there?
Oh, yes, you are. Go ahead.
Am I there? Oh, great. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I know other people want to say a few words. I had a few noted down because I went on 3 Himalayan trips with Doug, as well as climbing in 1 or 2 other places like Slovakia. I guess I could start by being perfectly honest and say we didn't see eye to eye on every occasion, but we went to some magic exploratory areas that I'd have never been able to go to at the time. And for that, I'll be eternally grateful. Places such as the hugely Buddhist north area of Bhutan, the then very difficult to access peaks of northeast Sikkim, and Armathwaite Crag in the Eden Valley. People have mentioned correctly Doug's charismatic character. You never really wanted to do wrong by him. I can remember trying to squeeze our gear into 20 kilos whole luggage on a flight back from Delhi when Doug arrived with an extra holdall full 20 kilos of fresh mangoes. And he just simply talked his way onto the flight, convincing the check-in that his life would be in great danger if he didn't get this back to his then Indian mother-in-law in the UK. And being in India, they kind of understood. You know. The first trip we went on together was Bhutan in the 80s. The weather was pretty uncooperative most of the time, which was something of a signature to all of our trips. Trying to find a route onto the mountain one day, I was coming down moraine in sort of heavy, wet snowfall, and I kind of skedaddled. You know, I had ski poles, but I twisted my back and it got quite painful to walk. And back in camp, Doug said, you know, no problem, youth. I've got this really fantastic homeopathic medicine, you know, take this 3 times a day, you'll be as right as rain in no time. Well, I wasn't. after 3 days, I was exactly the same. And somebody else on the trip took me aside and said, I've got these really heavy duty ibuprofen tablets, you know, have a couple of those instead, which I did. And next morning, I was just perfect. There was no pain. I was just raring to go up the hills. And Doug stood there beaming, extolling the virtues of homeopathy. And I went to open my mouth, and then I realized I just didn't have the heart to tell him. So off we went. You know, he was happy, I was happy, and at the time, that was all that mattered. Thanks, Doug, and back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Lindsay. And it's nice to finish off with a photo of the two of you there together, which is wonderful. Okay, so I know Dennis Gray wants to say something. Dennis, are you there? Can we unmute Dennis Gray? The wonders of technology.
I do not see him. If he's under a different account or something.
He's under DD Gray 27.
Ah, got him.
Yeah, good man.
Okay. Imagine you're in the Bell in Derby, a pub, the watering hole of the local climbers at that time. It's the winter of 1959-1960. And out of the night appeared two older teenagers. And for some reason, they sought me out. Are you going to Wales this weekend? They said. I said, I might do. They said, could we come with you? I said, maybe. And they said, well, we want to do some climbing. So I said, okay. I phoned Ray College, an old friend, and managed to get us booked into Glandina, the hut under the Carnis in the Idwal Valley. The next morning, we stomped over the Carnis and down to Crearisfa, hoping to climb Kirkes's route. I'd done that when I was 15 years old, and I thought, this will impress these teenagers. Unfortunately, it started to snow. Remember, this was January, and it got pretty wild. And so we got into the Great Gully instead. And that turned out to be an absolute epic. First of all, there was the snow, and then it turned to icy rain. And on the final section, where you traverse out under a big roof, our last man couldn't see because his glasses were freezing up. Eventually, we got out and over the top of the Carnis and back down to Glandina. We were soaked to the skin, but my two companions were bubbling. One was Des Adlon and the other was Doug Scott. And so over the next year, probably, Doug climbed a lot with Des and I. The shot of him in his book, Up and About, on Froggatt Edge, it says in the picture that it's Sunset Slab. It wasn't, it was Sunset Crack, it's my picture. About 2 years on from that, 3 years on, Doug was getting married. He was only 20 years old. He invited Des and I to his wedding. And we presented him with a pair of rock boots, a pair of PAs. He'd never, ever climbed in a pair of rock boots before. He'd always climbed in gym pumps. As Chris said, Doug was used to doing things on a very small budget. And I found out at this wedding reception that I was the driver, the chauffeur for the honeymoon. So I took Jan, his wife, and Doug to Pennygurrid. They stayed the night there, and then the next night they moved in beside us, camping under Dinas Cromlech. One of Doug's big interests was rugby, and I was living in Derby, and so I drove over to Nottingham a couple of 2 or 3 times, and Des and he went to school together, and they played rugby for a rugby club as juniors in a club in Nottingham. And so I went over there, and it wasn't anything for mamby-pambies, this. They were playing real rugby in the gym, 5-a-side or 7-a-side, and they tackled. They tackled as if their life depended on it. And I can remember in modern times being with Doug somewhere and him turning to me and saying, "I'm sorry this afternoon, I've got to go off. I can't go climbing." And say, well, why? He said, "Well, I've got to watch the rugby match. The international's on." So you understand he was very keen on rugby. And so we stayed friends until 10 days ago or so when he died. And of course, he became and was, from the word go, an incredible character, a great mountaineer, and somebody, of course, I'm very happy and proud to have been in at the start when he first started climbing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Wonderful. And there are a few more chats coming. There's a nice message from Ronnie Kenyon, who's written about how Doug gave a talk for the Eden Mountaineering Club in 1975. Thanks, Ronnie, for that. I was talking to Andy Cave actually before we talked, and he said that as they descended Changabang, they came across some pegs which must have been placed by Doug Scott. So it's lovely the way it all sort of links in tonight. By the way, do pipe up with questions about Changabang if you'd like as well. Steve Goodwin is joining us now. Steve, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I'd just like to tell you what probably my most treasured memory really of Doug from very, very recent times. Yes, about 3 weeks before he died, I popped over to visit him at Stewart Hill, and I was sat by the bedside. He was very quiet, but he was listening to the conversation, which was mainly between Trish and myself, obviously paying attention. And then Trish went off to make coffee, and so I just recalled to Doug an adventure, probably one of his last climbs, but a little misadventure really, of ours on Black Crag in Borrowdale, where close to the top of the second pitch, I took a real flyer. Doug wouldn't have been able to see me. He was on the belay below, round the corner on a ledge. The first he knew of it was the rope ripping through his plate and then ripping through his hands. I came to a stop swinging about 3 feet out from the ledge, which thankfully I hadn't hit. And we were both pretty battered. Phil Bartlett and Julian Atwood, who were on a route nearby, assisted us down to the bottom of the crag. And from there, we hobbled down to the bottom of Troutdale, where both of us crouched over the stream, washing the blood off ourselves. We were not a pretty sight, when along the footpath came a lady with her young son, and the little boy immediately said, "Look at those men, Mummy, what are they doing?" And she immediately yanked him away, pulled him back, saying, "Don't look at them." At this point, I was telling this story to Doug, and he'd been completely silent. And then he just, he opened his eyes and he gave a little chuckle, and he asked me what the name of the route was. And that was it. I thought, and he seemed so pleased. And it was a pleasure to me to see that he'd been listening all along and taking in that memory, which I shall certainly treasure. So bless him. I shall miss him.
Thank you, Steve. I think Derek Buckle's on the line as well. Derek, do you want to go ahead? If you can unmute Derek, Mike.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Derek.
Okay, well, my memories of Doug don't go back quite as far as Dennis's, but it's always nice to have memories, good memories of someone that you know. And I'd like to share with you some climbing that we did in the Clonk in 2008. And it was just after Doug had had 2 knee replacements. Now, most people have knee replacements at quite separate intervals, but Doug, being Doug, wanted his immediately one after the other, which is what he did. And we went down to the Clonk, we were with Martin Scott, and we were climbing on the limestone down there. And one particular route we were on was called the Petit Aiguille at Envaux. Now, this is not a difficult climb, it's a 5A. I led it and Doug followed me up in good style, considering he was a sort of a recent invalid. And there were about half a dozen young German climbers trying to do something very difficult on the next climb to us, which they failed on. And they decided that as these 2 old fogies had managed to climb this route next door, that they would have a go at this route as well. But suffice it to say, they didn't actually manage to get off the ground. And they came over to us afterwards in very, very good humour and sort of said, well, I don't know how you did it, but we're going to be training so that we can climb like you 2 guys when we get to your age. So that's a good memory that I have of Doug. I wanted to share with you.
Thanks very much, Derek. Always good to see you on these. So as things stand, there are no more hands up on the list. So if anyone wants to put a hand up, that would be great. Actually, I might just ask Andy a question now, if I may. I mean, Andy, obviously, Doug must have been a big inspiration for your trip to Changabang, I guess. Do you want to share any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I didn't have so long to chat tonight, but I think in 2 ways, really. I mean, the books that I read as a kid, you know, books by Chris and Doug and Pete Boardman and Joe Tasker were massively influential. That whole Alpine style ethic, I suppose. And as well as that, the other way in which they were influential is that my very first trips to the Himalayas in the 80s, I was 21 when I first went to the Himalayas, and I went out there for 3 expeditions back to back, which I've never actually written about or talked about much. But I was climbing with people who were a little bit older than me, but they had been on expeditions with Doug. And so they had really learnt a lot. Simon Yates, Sean Smith, Mark Miller. There were these kind of slightly wild characters from living in Sheffield, but in winters they'd been working as dustbin men, the Alpine bin men as they were named. So they'd been on these trips with Doug, and I think I guess it had accelerated their knowledge of how to run a trip, different ways of having a common base camp, having different objectives. And so for me to be able to climb with those guys, it was almost like I was 1 step removed from all that experience that Doug had. And then, although I never climbed with him, we caught up. I mean, I did a talk for him at Cannes, and the only thing Lindsay's anecdote there was great. I mean, both about his power of persuasion, getting those mangoes on the flight, but the other thing was around that mystical element. I was in Rawalpindi. I can't remember where we were going. I think we were going to we tried the north face of the Oga in '89 and not done it. And then we went back to Snow Lake in Pakistan to try some of the big walls around there near Latok Oga. And we met Doug, and he was giving us a bit of advice in the hotel in Rawalpindi. And it seemed to revolve around how we should wait for the changing moon and how that was going to bring about some incredible spell of weather. I'm just thinking about Lindsay's thing with the magic potions. And the weather was pretty poor up at Snow Lake, but we thought it's all right because Doug, the mentor, has told us when the moon changes, it's going to become really good. And when the moon changed, the weather went from not very good to absolutely dreadful. So I never actually said anything to Doug, but I never really looked at the moon much after that, it's fair to say. But I'll stop there.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to go to Nigel Buckley now, because Nigel's been, I gather we had over 200 people watching on YouTube tonight, or still do, in fact. Welcome, you guys, and thanks for joining us. Nigel's going to read out some of the YouTube questions.
Hi, Nick. So far, not really any questions. Lots of nice comments thanking us for putting this on. Yeah, we have one question for Chris. I don't think Chris is in the meeting, is he? Chris?
There is a Chris in, but we're just trying to establish whether it's the Chris or whether it's Sir Chris. Chris, perhaps you'd like to make yourself known if it is you. But go ahead, Nigel. Perhaps.
Yeah, he did say that he might not be able to make it. Okay. Anyway, it's a question from Adrian, and he says, if Chris could be up in the mountains again now, where would he be, and why would he choose that mountain? I think I can probably answer for him because I asked him a very similar question, and the answer was Shivling. It was an impromptu climb that he did with Jim Fotheringham when he went to give a talk somewhere, and he said because it was so impromptu and they weren't expecting to do it, and it was a it's a lightweight expedition. It's one that he looks back on really quite fondly. Quite in contrast to his big Annapurna and Everest expeditions. And what else do we have? Andy Perkins says his first trip outside Europe was to Baffin Island, and Doug was super helpful to him and his friends and sent him pictures of Mount Asgard. But other than that, there are no other questions.
Thanks, Nigel. Let's unmute Melanie, because Melanie, I think, wants to say something.
Hello. Yeah, I think I'm unmuted. I just wanted to share just something else about Doug. So I didn't climb with him. I only joined the Alpine Club, well, under 10 years ago. So I only met him like relatively recently. But I just wanted to say like how he was always really encouraging and supportive of various things, which was lovely. And I particularly remember, well, I think I was introduced to him through Henry Day and going to talks, some of his CAN talks. And I think he once got me up on stage on the RGS to hold some of his pictures for the auction, which was pretty embarrassing, but I couldn't really refuse. But then after that, he used to do the Mountain Arts Festivals sometimes up in the Lake District, and he invited me to speak at one of those. It must have been 2016 because I wrote a book about the Northern Lights, and so although that's not specifically mountaineering, I did ski out across Svalbard, so there were like snowy elements. So he asked me to do some readings about the skiing across Svalbard and a bit about the Northern Lights. I think he was quite interested in the physics, even though he said something about not paying much attention at school, but finding it really fascinating. But what was funny was that after the Mountain Arts Festival, he asked all the speakers back to his house for dinner, and a lot of them stayed over the night. And I was going to go back to Kendal because I have an aunt in Kendal, so I was staying with her. But it got later, and of course it was dark, and it'd been quite hard to find his house. Actually, it's a bit out in the middle of nowhere. And he was really, so he was concerned, and he was really saying to me that I shouldn't go home. And he insisted that I phone my aunt and told her that I was absolutely fine, but I was going to be staying the night over at his house. And he found me a sleeping bag, and I think I ended up crashing on the floor next to Andy Parkin and sneaking out early in the morning instead. So that was, it was funny. It was a nice evening, but he was just very always so friendly, welcoming, encouraging, hospitable, considerate, and it was a pleasure to be able to know him. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Henry, now's your moment. Henry Day is going to have a word. Mike, can you unmute Henry Day? H. Day. Sorry, Henry, we're just working on it. You need to unmute yourself, I think, Henry. No, it doesn't seem to be working.
I've sent the signal the request. And
okay.
Mick Fowler is here, so let me.
Can you also unmute? Actually, I've just tried Rosalind. Rosalind, whilst we're sorting out Henry, Rosalind, do you want to? Yes, there we go. Rosalind, you're on.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I had a question for Chris, if he's there, or it was about the Changabang expedition and the British-Indian composition of the team, and I just wondered how this mix of nationalities and the different knowledge that team members might bring to the expedition, how that enhanced it, or made a difference to the planning decisions and so on.
Rosalind, I don't believe Chris is in, but I'm going to hand over to Nigel because I feel like Nigel will know the answer to that question.
I think it was all Chris, really. I think they already had Changabang as the objective, and Chris was the leader. And they originally went to do the West Ridge, but Chris decided to change the objective because of the sort of skill set of the team.
Henry, we haven't I don't think we've managed to unmute you yet. Thanks, Rosalind, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to say thank you. And Mick Fowler, I see, is in tonight. Mick, do you want to pipe in with anything? It's good to see your face. Of course, Mick was on the mountain at the same time as Andy.
Yes, certainly. I mean, Changabang was the longest time I'd ever been out on a mountain, and I mean it was a very tragic trip, of course, with Brendan dying, but certainly it left a lot of very deep memories, and I think probably in all of the four of us, or the three of us that were left, much respect for the mountain and for the first ascensionists of the other routes on that mountain. But I thought while I'm on, perhaps I should tell one short, brief anecdote about Doug as well. I never actually climbed with Doug, but of course I met him many times over the years. And there's already been some anecdotes about his legendary persistence. And I remember once he phoned me when I was at work and I was in a meeting. And there was a rule really that you absolutely did not interrupt these particular meetings that took place every month. And he got through to a very feisty lady in the office who refused to basically get me from this meeting. But Doug persisted and persisted and persisted and made up all sorts of excuses about why this was an incredibly urgent call. And eventually I was called from this meeting and Doug said to me, there we are. I always knew that I could overcome bureaucratic hurdles. I think perhaps that sums up Doug, that he was probably the most persistent man that I know almost, in that if he felt strongly about something, he would work on persuading people that he was right. There's no doubt about it. But, I'm sure he displayed that persistence with his mountaineering as well, and hence achieved his sort of legendary achievement. Perhaps that sums up Doug, that he was probably the most persistent man.
Thank you, Mick. Could we all put our virtual hands together for Chris Bonington, who's just joined? Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Chris. Could you do one favour? Could you silence your YouTube, please?
Mountaineering as well, and hence achieved his sort of legendary.
So go and click on your YouTube, and there'll be a little mute button on the YouTube. Okay.
Thank you, Mick. So we're getting a bit of an echo back, aren't we? Join. Welcome, Chris.
Well, I hadn't worked out how to do it.
just close the window, or close the YouTube window. That's probably easiest. So no, you would go and click on your YouTube, and there'll be a little mute button on the YouTube.
Okay. Thank you, Mick. So we're getting a bit of an echo back, aren't we? Chris, forgive me, we're just going to mute you for a second, and then Michael's going to chat with you and tell you what to do. And in the meantime, let's go to Richard Toone. I think Richard Toone has a question. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah. When after the Everest expedition, when Mick Burke died on the mountain, 3 of us in the local area in Wigan, from where he came, we set up a local charity, the Mick Burke Memorial Trust, and we ran the Mick Burke Memorial Trust for about 20 years, supported by his family, and people like Pete Boardman was on the trust. And what we did was essentially raise funds from a fairly prestigious slideshow each year, where all the major mountaineers of the time came and gave their services, including Doug and including Chris. And I think Chris came more than once. And then we provided grants for young people to support them in undertaking outdoor adventurous activities. And we ran that for about 20 years. It was very, very successful. We used to hold the lectures, if you want to call them lectures, in an old Methodist place, which has been knocked down now, but it was the biggest place in Wigan, and it was like a massive, great big theatre. It had a big balcony, so it seated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And the event became one of the prestigious events in the year in Wigan, with the mayor going and all of those sorts of things. You know, I remember all of the major mountaineers that we all know of. I won't mention all the names because you know them all, but I was always absolutely amazed at the really strong camaraderie there was, and these people all gave their time very, very freely, were very, very supportive, and really wanted to be part of it. And you know, it was quite amazing, really. You know, it was a very, very successful charity. We only ran it for 20 years, around about 20 years, because it was always meant to be, you know, time limited. And, you know, I just put on record my thanks to all of those people who did give support over that sort of 20 years, from the mid-70s to the mid-90s.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. That's great to hear that. So, Chris, I've just asked you to unmute again. Do we have an? Oh, there we are.
I think I'm unmuted. Am I?
You are indeed. We're still getting a bit of an echo from you, but let's try anyway. Did you want to say anything about Doug?
My thanks to all of those people who did give support.
Well, yes. What's all the talking I can hear in the background?
Great, thank you very much, Richard. That's great to hear that. That's a good. So, Chris, I've just asked you to unmute again. Do we have an? Oh, there we are.
I think I'm unmuted. Am I?
Chris, so Chris, you have to. You'll have to close the window for YouTube. So go if you can click on your web browser and close YouTube. Otherwise, it will just get too confusing, because it's going to start looping round and round. So you should. You've got control over the muting and unmuting yourself, so I've given that, so you should then be able to come in for YouTube. So
okay, I'm unmuted. I think.
Web browser and close YouTube.
Or am I muted?
Otherwise, it will just get. Yeah, but I can still. You must have YouTube still running in the background, unless it's someone else.
Okay, is that have I got YouTube running, or?
Yes, yes, in your web browser in the background.
How do I get rid of that?
Close the web browser. Or
yeah, where's my web browser?
You've now got everything from Zoom.
Okay, that's the web browser. And close YouTube. But if I come out of that,
otherwise it will just get. Yeah, but Zoom should still work.
Okay, I think I've got out of that.
Yeah, it's fixed.
Fantastic.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. What a technical wizard you are. Thank you very much. And welcome, Chris. It's great that you could join us.
I apologize. I'm a total untechnical wizard, but yes, great to talk to everyone. Yeah.
As John Porter said, the technical side is more challenging than the mountaineering sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for joining us. I mean, did you want to say something about Doug first of all?
Well, Doug, yeah, has been one of my closest friends. I even actually
I was his best man at his marriage to Trish, and we've known each other and we've climbed together for what, some 40 years. And of course, he's been on all my major expeditions, but he is, I think it's all been summed up actually, his splendid stubbornness, his superb persuasiveness. He is brilliant at using every single one of us and persuading us to do it. The number of lectures I've given to Can are innumerable, but I think what Doug has done, I think more than practically anyone, I think most of us in different ways try to put a little bit back to society or to Nepalese people or what have you. But Doug has put so much back. And what he's done for Community Action Nepal particularly is quite extraordinary. And I think this is why Doug is such, he's worldwide. And I think the way within an hour of his death being announced, it had gone right the way around the world. And I think all of us have had these messages flooding in from people whose lives he's influenced so much, and in every time for the better. So no, Doug is a great and wonderful figure. And certainly on some of my hardest climbs, Doug has always been there, whether it was on Changabang, where he was magnificent, and beginning actually, first time we'd actually climbed together on an expedition, and ever since on all the other expeditions. And then, so on the big expedition, Everest the hard way, he once again, no, it wasn't the kind of climbing he loved doing, but he got stuck in and he did it. And he was a very, very good team member. And it was interesting at the beginning, he expressed his doubts about the whole thing. And then as the expedition went on and he became more involved, and he became totally happy within it and the way we were working and everything else. And I just remember him so especially in every kind of way.
And Chris, a question for you. I mean, when you first stood on, well, I know you were in the sort of second team, as it were, on Changabang. You didn't go to what you call the true summit. But when you climbed it, did you have any sort of premonition that it would become the scene of so many sort of future expeditions and epic ones as well?
Well, no way, really. But I mean, when we went to Changabang, and of course, I'd seen photographs of Changabang, and that's why I chose it. I thought it'd be a fantastic mountain to go and climb. And we knew very, very little about it. And as it came out, and I think I brought out in what I was talking, the working with our Indian friends and working within a joint expedition, and us, the climbing team, who would have really, would have loved to have done a hard climb on Changabang. But also we realized, and the others realized as well, that we had to work with the Indians, and we also had to get an Indian to the top of the mountain, and we succeeded in doing that. But at the time, no, even at that time as well, that date, 74, you couldn't imagine there being so many routes on it. And of course, the amazing thing is how Changabang has become in some ways such a British mountain, with so many of us, Mick, John, and so on. All of us have done routes on Changabang, and how good it is, because it is one of the most lovely mountains in the world. But the other thing, something you mentioned about Sullivan, and I think, yes, one of the most beautiful mountains in the British Isles, and it's as beautiful as any mountain in the world, is Sullivan, that lovely peak in the far north of Scotland.
Yes, Sullivan's a wonderful, wonderful mountain. Thank you, Chris. Henry Day is still not unmutable, I believe. So just give us a wave, Henry. Sorry, I don't think we're going to be able to get you on.
Well, can I give him a wave too? Hi, Henry.
I think I'm on now.
Oh, great. There he is.
How about that? Hi, Chris.
We're still going on either side of Annapurna.
Oh, there you are. Yes, I had you blanked out. Hey, look, I've got a very small anecdote about Doug. He was 11 months older than me, I learned by looking up in his various obituaries.
And we got in touch when I'd started doing overland trips out east when it was pretty early days in the 60s. And he started corresponding with me because he was starting to do trips too. He'd been already to North Africa, but he hadn't been further east than Turkey was the one in particular that I've got here. And he took something like 19 17-year-olds and 2 trucks and some mates of his from the Nottingham Mountaineering Club to look after them. And they took on an amazing number of peaks up in the Sat and the Chilo Dag. And there's one bit, there's an assault on one of the highest peak there called Resko Tepe. The bivouac on the sheer north wall, rock wall on the north side was made. I mean, these are with 17 to 19-year-olds that he, if you then read in the small print that he'd been master at the school where these had been boys. And anyway, there they were. And this was his comment on bivouacs, which is rather rich, given what subsequently he experienced himself in one particular bivouac. He said, whatever Frenchmen and other continentals may say in romantic essays on bivouacs, they are to be avoided, if possible, as they are invariably uncomfortable, however well planned and equipped they may be. And I thought that was actually quite an interesting epitaph, given what happened to him later. Anyway, there it was, and I dug out a couple of his reports from all those years ago, and somewhere I got correspondence to. But that's it. Cheers, Doug.
Thank you, Henry. Actually, now we've got Chris back in the room. Rosalind, do you want to ask your question? Let's see if we can unmute you. Okay. Rosalind was going to ask you, Chris, if you're still there, about the dynamics between the Indian and the British climbers. And whether you felt that enhanced the expedition.
No, I'm indeed here as well. Yes, very good question. I think the dynamics were good in the sense that we realized that we couldn't be there without the cooperation of the Indians. And I'd been told, we had, Nick Escort and I had a lovely little expedition about 2 years earlier when we'd made the first ascent of a mountain called Brahma. And we actually managed to shed our Indian friends who weren't very good at climbing. And we went and grabbed it ourselves. And the IMF, the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, were pretty pissed off with that. And it was made very, very clear that we had another joint expedition. We had to make sure that an Indian actually got to the top of the mountain, which I think is perfectly fair. So when we went to Changabang, we realized we were going to have to do that. Unfortunately, though, as I said, Balwant Sandhu, who was my co-leader, he was a fabulous bloke and very unlike stuffy senior Indian Army officers. So we got on very well together. And I think it did actually enhance the expedition or the experience in a lot of ways. The very fact that we did have to make compromises in what we were going to do and had different approaches and everything else. And I think that kind of compromise and that broadening and also getting to understand better a group of people from a very different culture, which the Indians, their philosophy, their approach is so much different from ours. And I think actually working together and understanding people's differences is a very useful thing. And so I think they definitely did enhance the experience. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I must say, John Porter mentioned the Indians in his chat. John, do you want to? There's that amazing picture of them carrying barrels of rope and what have you up the gorge. John, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I mean, it is important that we recognise we are on the backs of more than just the climbers before us. We really are literally carried into the mountain, everything we need by our porters, on these expeditions. I must say on the Polish trips, we were also poor, that we were expected to be literally porters ourselves, so we were carrying just as much, but many of them were carrying twice the loads. And just to expand on that story a little bit, one of the lads, you have to climb about 6,000 feet out of Lata to get up to a place called Lata Kar, which is the first pass on the way in towards the Rishiganga Gorge. And one of the lads had been ill. One of the was, and we didn't know, but he was lagging way behind. So when I was counting in the loads, it was getting dusk, and there were 2 people missing still. And there was a cousin, and he said, those are my 2 brothers. One of them wasn't feeling so well. So I quickly emptied my big sack, and we went back down the hill, the 2 of us, and we found them probably about 2/3 of the way up. And one lad had been really struggling. We, the 2 of us with our empty sacks, just divided up what this lad had been carrying, and off we went. And we eventually got up to camp and had our cups of tea and mashed potato and went to bed. And the next morning, this lad had recovered. He just had a bad day. And it was that cousin and the 2 brothers that on the way out down the Rishiganga, unknown to us, we'd lost one of our porters who had lagged behind, gotten quite ill and gone back, but he dropped his load. And that load was the one that contained our hammocks and all of our ropes and some of our climbing gear. So they basically saved the day, those 3 lads, because they turned around with this one barrel and came back in. And, so the day that could have been a day of despair turned to a day of joy when these 3 lads appeared across the river and came across, and hey ho, we had an expedition again. So they're extremely important, and they're very much part of the team, and they were made to feel part of that team all the way. And without them, we obviously say we wouldn't. We would have had to have just gone for a walk around the block and then gone out.
Thanks, John. And I should also mention that Mandip Singh is actually with us live from New Delhi. So welcome, Mandip. That's fantastic. I guess it must be getting on for after 2 a.m. there now. So
Loretta,
good effort.
Mandip Singh's on this Zoom. Do you want to say hello? Oh, quick, Loretta. Mandip Singh, the great friend of Loretta's as well.
Oh, okay. Hello, Loretta.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, he wrote a message actually saying, very sorry to have missed meeting him literally by a few hours, as we spent a weekend with Chris and Loretta last year, and he'd had an exhausting day. I think he's talking about Doug, an exhausting day with his fundraiser, but a heartfelt goodbye to him from so many of us in the climbing community of the world. So that's a lovely message from Mandip. Thank you.
So Mandip's listening as well.
I think it's
he's
very
involved
late
in
in
this.
India now. It's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I think a lot of people have stayed up to watch this or listen to it.
Fantastic. Well, folks, I think thanks so much everyone for joining us and for chipping in. We're not going to stop the meeting or the stream, I don't think. So don't leave. But I'm just going to tell you, sort of do my little summing up, so that we and then share a slide about the next Alpine ClubCast, which is in 5 weeks' time. Also, just wanted to say many thanks to the French team for letting us watch that wonderful footage of their repeat of Andy's climb on the North Face. So our next Alpine ClubCast, number 21, goodness me, 21, is in 5 weeks' time on the 19th of January. And it's entitled Bagpipes and Blagging, Worldwide First Ascents with Ustin Hawthorne and Tom Livingston. And they'll be talking about their recent climbing trips around the world. So yeah, do have a look at the Alpine Club Library YouTube page, where you can watch, like and share all the previous Alpine ClubCasts. Thanks all for joining us. Don't leave, keep safe and keep active. And please unmute yourselves now so we can applaud tonight's speakers. From all at the Alpine Club, a Merry Christmas from London and a happier New Year.
You had a mute. We're muted.
You've got to unmute yourself, I'm afraid.
Somebody don't go. You want to stay? I'm happy to. Oh, look, it's Victor.
Could you hear me at the end there?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry.
Well, sorry, but maybe there was a brief moment when not.
I thought I'd been muted, but that's all good. Thanks very much, everybody. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick and the team. Great.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Melanie.
There's no unmute all button anymore.
We missed you this afternoon, Nick.
I've got one other Doug story if people can bear with me. Unfortunately, there's now none of the three left to confirm it. But on Shishapangma, some of you will have heard me tell this story before. On the second bivouac on Shishapangma, Roger, Baxter, Jones, Alex, and Doug. Early in the morning, the tea was brewing, the hiss of the stove, and Doug was in the corner doing something, and Alex and Roger didn't quite know what. And anyway, there was a bit of a pause, and he was passed a mug of tea, and Doug said, right, lads, we better pack up. Said, well, we're going to do that in a second, Doug. He said, yeah, we got to pack up and go down. And so Roger looked at Alex and vice versa, and they said, well, why do you want to go down, Doug? He says, I've just rolled the I Ching. And from what I think it says, what I understand it says is give up. So there was a bit of a pause, and Alex, with his lawyer-like mind, looked at Roger, and they kind of put their eyebrows up, and then Alex asked Doug, he said, well, hold on, Doug, give up what? He said, well, it just says give up. Well, you have to think it's the I Ching, which Howard's has a spiritual second meaning. And clearly what it means in this case is to give up all thoughts of the lower plane and move on to a higher plane by carrying on to the summit. And Doug thought about this for a second and said, oh, you're right, youth. All right, we'll carry on. We got to pack up and go down. And so Roger looked at Alex and vice versa. Why do you want to go down, Doug?
What do you want to do?
I just rolled the idea.
Yes.
What I think it says, what I understand it says is give up.
How do you keep all these comments?
I did ask Doug about that actually. That actually happened, because knowing that Alex and Roger like to tell stories as well. But he did look at me rather strange and says, yeah, it was something like that.
Very good.
Great comments coming in from Paul Pritchard. Did anyone see that?
Yeah, I was just reading those.
Yeah. Worth a read. I think I might have failed to ask Dennis to come back in. Are you there, Dennis, still? I think Dennis might have gone to get...
I did unmute him just a second ago, so he's...
Dennis, if you're still there, I apologise if I missed you. I was getting things coming from all directions at one.
Oh no, Dennis is gone.
Oh, he's gone.
Okay.
Sorry to hear that.
I could just add, if I may, Nick, to what Chris and Henry Day said about the Nottingham lads going off. This is going back a long time to the mid-60s in Cambridge, but Doug, I think must have been, was brought to speak to the Mountaineering Club about his trip to the Hoggar, and it just showed what a few lads from Nottingham could do, get a vehicle, go absolutely anywhere they pleased, and it certainly, as Henry Day implied, inspired quite a few of us to get a vehicle and go off wherever we pleased. And so that was, I suppose, quite influential at that stage. So yeah, I was going to put my hand up much earlier on, and then Henry Day got his word in first in much more detail. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Wonderful. I see Victor's in the room. I need to apologise to our president for missing the committee meeting today. I do apologise.
Well, it's all right.
I think I'm gently going to shut down.
Yeah, you had a very good excuse.
I've just been booked for my second concert of the year, which is on Thursday. So I've actually got some work.
Fantastic! Wow, fantastic.
I'm raising a glass.
Well done, Nick.
Well, I could share one small Doug story if you want.
Yes, please.
We were on. I was on that trip with Lindsay in Bhutan, and Doug is a ferociously competitive person at all times, and insisted on bouldering, and I just kind of got tired and I wanted to go back into supper, and he said, "Come on, one last problem." And of course, I slipped off and twisted my ankle very badly. And this was 11 years after Kanchenjunga, when Pete Boardman had done something similar going into Kanch. And Doug said, "Well, no problem, youth. We've got a couple of days. We'll put you on a donkey, and we'll you trek into base camp that way." And I explained, "No, actually, I'm allergic to horses and donkeys." And he said, "No problem. We'll give you lots of antihistamines." He said, "No, it's the dust. It's the dust from that gets me." So it's okay, youth. We'll get you covered in Gore-Tex and we'll throw water on you as we go along. So we went along these paths, and it went like that the next 2 days, with Doug and Lindsay throwing buckets of water on me as I rode on this donkey. The donkey went over a 4,000-meter pass and began to get the altitude and started wheezing. And Doug turned to everybody and says, "See, youth, the donkey's allergic to Victor." Anyway, that's my one story.
I just left a note about, which got a bit garbled in the time, but just less than 2 years ago, Doug was on a visit to London for a CAN event, and he was at Westway Climbing Wall and doing the fairly serious higher level route 6As, and age well past his mid-70s even then. So.
Anyway, thanks. I'm going to go now. It's quite late here. Thank you very much, Nick and John and Andy. It's a fantastic evening and really, really interesting. Brilliant job. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Victor. Can I echo that? And I think Chris has left us, but it was nice to have him with us at the end. So thanks, Andy and John. Thanks for your time rehearsing.
Chris is still here.
Still got Chris.
Yeah, we'll see you next year.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Nice one. Catch up soon. Stay safe.
Yes, you too.
Fantastic what you've done. Great.
I'm unmuted.
Bye now.
Yeah, I'm going to drop the streaming. So thanks very much to everybody on YouTube. It's been great I think we went over 200 people for one moment, which is definitely the highest we've ever had. So, and thanks very much, Paul Pritchard, for all the comments on YouTube as well. Okay.